So many announcements this week. The RBA Governor, Dr Philip Lowe, spoke about the economy needing record low interest rates for several years and also wants a permanent increase on job seeker, being more of an issue on fairness. What are your thoughts on these two issues?
Yeah, look, interest rates will remain low. I think the issue is around inflation. We don't quite know where inflation will go over the next few years. It's not looking like it's going to go anywhere. As a result, they will need to keep interest rates low. So it is looking like borrowing will remain low for longer. We will see continued growth in house prices off the back of that. And then, correspondingly, the idea of fairness, I think that is something that needs to be considered, that on one hand, we do have people who are doing quite well through the pandemic, but there have been people that have been hit very hard, and particularly younger people, particularly people exposed to tourism, hospitality, education. There has been a wide job loss for those employment types. So, this pandemic has led to quite unusual situation.
With interest rates staying low, Nerida, and inflation an obvious issue that we could face, what other kinds of regulations do you think may be considered to try and keep that under control in the context of interest rates being as low as they are till, for another 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge. I mean, it's been so interesting how quickly the conversation has switched from, we need to support the housing market, we need to support the building industry, to, we are looking now at the potential for quite runaway price growth. So on one hand, we can't increase interest rates. It's not all about the housing market. When you look at monetary policy, there are such a wide range of measures that the Reserve Bank need to look at. So, what else do you look at? I think there will be a lot of the incentives that are available at the moment will obviously be a focus. If you have a look at the availability of things available to first home buyers at the moment, they are very generous. They're probably the most generous they've been since at least the global financial crisis. And also restrictions to lending. At this stage, the budget last year was all about freeing up access to finance and reducing a lot of the restrictions that were put on banks. But, that could also be a potential that is looked at from a legislative perspective. So I think, on one hand, monetary policy, it's only obviously one lever that does help with economic growth. And I think we do need to look again at a lot of the other measures that are put in place.
Let's talk about housing. Regional Australia, the population is booming. I mean, we've just had some incredible results.
Yeah, Regional Australia has been one of the key beneficiaries of the pandemic. If you have a look at a lot of the government policy over decades, there has been a focus on trying to get people to Regional Australia. But, it has been a slow trickle. Prior to the pandemic, people were moving to regional areas such as Wollongong and Geelong. Those areas did pretty well, but more broadly, we were seeing a drain to capital cities. That's been reversed over the last 2 quarters that the ABS have tracked. They have found that there has been record movement to regional Australia. It is very unusual to see this, and it is primarily as a result of people looking for more space. Changes to the way that we work is a big change, so that has freed up the ability for people to live where they want. And then also, coming back to a lot of the trade patterns, that we do have some really good iron ore conditions at the moment, some really good mining conditions, and as I mentioned last week, also agriculture is doing pretty well. So particularly wheat is seeing a bumper conditions at the moment. So, there's quite unusual conditions that really the pandemic has brought on.
Nerida, there has been a sea change, tree change extravaganza that really has right across Australia. What has been the impact of Victoria's prolonged lockdown regarding population numbers and where they're going?
Yeah, so Victoria were in lockdown throughout the September quarter, so that's the last series that the ABS tracked. But we did see the highest level of movement out of Victoria to other states, particularly southeast Queensland, the highest level recorded since the early 90s. So surprising people could get out. The borders were pretty tightly shut from Victoria into other locations, but nevertheless, we did see this quite significant movement taking place. People did head up to southeast Queensland. That was a key beneficiary, but it is going to be interesting to see what happens now. I mean, Victoria is now on a much more even playing field to the rest of Australia, so I don't think necessarily we'll see quite the level of movement that we did see over that prolonged lockdown.
And just quickly, we've spoken about Hobart over the, a year or so doing so well. How is Hobart and how does it compare to some of the other capital cities that we're seeing?
Yeah, Hobart has been a top performer for a prolonged period. So it did see a bit of a stumble. You know, it was a bit like Melbourne and Sydney in May, June last year. We saw a little bit of a decline in population levels, but Hobart has surged back and is now seeing very strong price growth. You know, we're almost getting back to double digits again. So Hobart is a star performer. I mean, it does relate back to how significantly the Hobart economy has changed over the past 5 years or so. It has gone from being a government-run town that is very dependent on primarily agriculture, but has moved on to being a very strong destination for tourism, education, all those, you know, quite a similar economy from an education perspective to Victoria. So, you know, that's now the borders are starting to open up again, and once the international borders come up again, it is going to be very good news for Hobart again.
Yeah, oh, look, it's a great city. I love Tasmania. It's an enormously attractive lifestyle for so many people, particularly those that are looking to retire, because everything is from Battery Point on. I'm dreaming now.
Beautiful.
It's the fresh seafood, Nerida. Good to talk to you. Let's catch up next week.
Salamanca Market.
Sounds good.
Oh, yeah. Talk to you then.